A dignified veteran. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the aisles of the local megastore, Pinnacle Mart. The rhythmic hum of shopping carts and the occasional beep of checkout scanners created a familiar ambience for shoppers bustling about their errands. Among them was 68-year-old Tom Reynolds, a black veteran with a commanding yet humble presence. His worn denim jacket bore a small patch with the words Vietnam Veteran, and his back was straight, a habit born of years in the military. His weathered hands gripped the cart as he navigated the store, carefully selecting the items on his list. Tom wasn't just shopping for himself. His wife, Ella, was confined to a bed at home, her health deteriorating from years of battling multiple sclerosis. The day's mission was clear: acquire the essentials: adult diapers, medications, and the simple but nourishing foods Ella could still enjoy. Every item placed in his cart was chosen with precision, each representing a small act of love for the woman who had been his anchor through decades of trials and triumphs. The store had recently undergone a major layout change, and Tom found himself in unfamiliar territory. The hygiene section, which had once been conveniently located near the pharmacy, was now tucked away in a confusing corner at the far end of the store. He sighed, his mind filled with thoughts of Ella waiting for him at home. Why'd they have to move everything? He muttered, scanning the signs above each aisle. He pushed his cart forward, determined to finish quickly and return to her side. As he turned into the hygiene aisle, he noticed a young couple arguing over which brand of diapers to purchase for their baby. Tom smiled faintly at the sight, their lively exchange reminding him of his younger days with Ella, when they too had debated trivial matters amidst the chaos of life. He gave them a polite nod as he passed and moved on to find the products he needed. Once his cart was nearly full, Tom decided to pick up something special for Ella. She hadn't had fresh strawberries in months, and her face would surely light up at the sight of her favorite fruit. He made his way to the produce section, scanning the vibrant displays until he found a small, plump carton of strawberries. Despite their price tag, he placed them gently in the cart, considering it a worthwhile splurge for Ella's happiness. At the checkout counter, Tom joined a line manned by a cheerful cashier named Sophia. She was in her early 20s, with a bright smile that seemed to lift the spirits of everyone she interacted with. As Tom unloaded his items onto the conveyor belt, Sophia greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. How are you today?" "I'm doing fine, thank you," Tom replied, his voice steady. "Just running errands for my wife. She'll be thrilled about these strawberries." Sophia smiled as she began scanning the items. "That's sweet of you. Your total comes to $78.94. Would you like to apply your veteran discount?" "Yes, please," Tom said, pulling out his ID card. Sophia punched in the code and frowned. She tapped the screen again, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Oh no, it looks like the system isn't letting me apply the discount to some of these items." Tom furrowed his brow. "That can't be right. I've always used the discount here for these supplies." Sophia looked apologetic. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll call the manager and see if they can help." Tom nodded patiently, though he couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. Moments later, a man in his early 30s strode toward them. He wore a sharp suit, his name tag reading Elliot Parks, store manager. His demeanor was brisk, his eyes scanning Tom with a quick, dismissive glance. "Is there an issue here?" Elliot asked, his tone clipped. Sophia explained the situation, her voice soft with apology. "Mr. Reynolds here is a regular customer. The system isn't applying his veteran discount to the hygiene products and—" "It's a new policy," Elliot interrupted. "Hygiene products are no longer eligible for discounts." Tom looked the manager in the eye, his voice calm but firm. "I understand policies can change, but this is sudden. These supplies are essential for my wife's care. A little notice would have been appreciated." Elliot shrugged, his expression unyielding. "Policies are policies. There's nothing I can do." The surrounding customers began to glance toward the exchange, Their interest peaked. Tom inhaled deeply, steadying his voice. "With all due respect, Mr. Parks, this isn't just about money. It's about supporting the people who serve this country. I wore that uniform proudly for over 20 years. A small discount isn't too much to ask." Elliot scoffed, his tone dripping with condescension. "You think wearing a uniform entitles you to special treatment? Newsflash, everyone's got bills to pay." A hush fell over the nearby shoppers. Tom's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. "It's not about entitlement. It's about respect." Elliot took a step closer, his voice low and biting. "Well, I don't respect freeloaders." The words hit like a slap, and Tom felt the sting of humiliation wash over him. Before he could respond, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Freeloaders? Is that what you call the men and women who defended your freedom?" Heads turned as the speaker emerged from the crowd. Standing tall and commanding attention was none other than Morgan Freeman, his presence as magnetic in person as it was on screen. Dressed casually but with an unmistakable air of dignity, he fixed Elliot with a piercing gaze. The air in the store seemed to shift as Morgan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You, sir, owe this man an apology." Elliot's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the legendary actor and the disgraced manager. Tom stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding as he realized the day was far from over. A storm of integrity. The silence in the store was palpable, as if the very air held its breath. Morgan Freeman's calm yet commanding presence seemed to have frozen the moment in time. His gaze, steady and unflinching, bore into Elliot Parks, the store manager. Elliot shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the actor's scrutiny, his previous smugness now replaced with visible unease. Tom Reynolds, still processing the sudden turn of events, glanced between Morgan and Elliot, unsure of what to expect. The surrounding shoppers, now fully engrossed in the drama unfolding before them, whispered in hushed tones, their phones discreetly recording the scene. Morgan broke the silence, his voice measured and deliberate. "Mr. Parks, do you understand the gravity of your actions? This man isn't just a customer. He's a veteran. A man who has sacrificed more for this country than most of us could ever fathom. And yet, here you stand, treating him with nothing but disrespect." Elliot cleared his throat, his earlier bravado faltering. I was just following company policy, Mr. Freeman. It's not personal." Morgan raised an eyebrow, his expression unyielding. "Not personal. You called him a freeloader. You dismissed his service as if it were meaningless. That's not company policy, Mr. Parks. That's your character on full display." Tom felt a swell of emotion rise in his chest, gratitude, anger, and a deep sense of vindication all at once. He opened his mouth to speak, but Morgan held up a hand, signaling him to wait. "This isn't just about a discount," Morgan continued, his voice resonating through the store. "It's about respect, about acknowledging the sacrifices that men like Mr. Reynolds have made. Do you even know what it takes to wear that uniform? To risk everything for a country that doesn't always repay the debt?" Elliot's face reddened, and he looked around nervously, realizing that the crowd was not on his side. His lips tightened into a thin line, but he didn't respond. Morgan took a step closer, his voice dropping to a softer, more pointed tone. "When we diminish the contributions of those who have served, we diminish ourselves, and when we fail to stand up against such disrespect, we become complicit in it." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding their heads, others whispering words of support for Tom. Several veterans among them stepped forward, their expressions mirroring the quiet dignity of their shared experiences. Tom finally spoke, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Mr. Freeman, I appreciate your words, but I didn't come here looking for a confrontation. I just wanted to buy what my wife needs. That's all." Morgan turned to Tom, his expression softening. "I know, Mr. Reynolds, but sometimes standing up isn't just about yourself. It's about all the others who face the same struggles in silence." The words resonated deeply with Tom. He thought of the countless veterans he had known over the years, many of whom had faced similar indignities. This moment, as uncomfortable as it was, felt like it carried a greater purpose. Morgan addressed the crowd, his voice lifting slightly. To all of you here today, remember this moment. Remember that silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality, it's complicity. And to the veterans among us, know that your service matters. It always has, and it always will. The store erupted in quiet applause, the tension dissipating as people expressed their agreement. Tom felt a lump in his throat as he glanced at Morgan, silently thanking him for stepping in. Elliot, now visibly flustered, cleared his throat again. Look, I didn't mean to cause a scene. Maybe I was out of line. But there's nothing I can do about the policy. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps you're in the wrong line of work. Before Elliot could respond, a voice crackled over the store's intercom. Mr. Parks, please report to the corporate office immediately. Elliot stiffened, his face pale. He muttered something under his breath and hurried toward the back of the store, leaving Morgan, Tom, and the crowd behind. As he disappeared from view, a collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the gathered onlookers. Morgan turned to Tom, his expression warm. Let's finish this shopping trip, shall we? Tom hesitated. Mr. Freeman, I don't want to impose. Morgan cut him off with a chuckle. Impose? My friend, it's an honor. Besides, I think the least I can do is make sure you leave here with what you came for. Together, they approached the checkout counter, where Sophia stood, her face a mixture of awe and determination. She began scanning Tom's items with care, applying every discount she could and even waiving a few fees outright. Morgan watched her with approval, his presence seeming to bolster her confidence. As Tom paid for his purchases, Morgan reached into his pocket and handed Sophia a crisp $100 bill. For whatever Mr. Reynolds didn't cover, and keep the rest for the next veteran who comes through. Sophia's eyes widened, and she nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'll make sure it goes to good use. Tom, now holding his bag of purchases, turned to Morgan with a look of profound gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do any of this. Morgan placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. You've already done more than enough for this country. Consider this a small way of saying thank you. As they exited the store together, the sun cast a golden glow over the parking lot, and the crowd outside parted to let them pass. The reporters, still lingering, snapped photos and shouted questions, but Morgan ignored them, his focus entirely on Tom. Do you have a ride home? Morgan asked as they reached the curb. Tom hesitated. I was going to take the bus. Morgan smiled. Not today. You're not. My car's just over there. Let me give you a lift. Before Tom could protest, Morgan signaled to a sleek black sedan parked nearby. A chauffeur stepped out and opened the door, waiting patiently as Morgan guided Tom inside. As the car pulled away, Tom glanced at Morgan, his voice quiet. You didn't have to do all this for me. Morgan met his gaze, his expression serious. Sometimes, the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact. You've given this country more than it could ever repay. The least I can do is remind you, and everyone else, that you're not forgotten. Tom sat back, the weight of the day's events beginning to lift. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen, not as just another customer or veteran, but as a man whose sacrifices mattered. As the car rolled toward Tom's home, he couldn't help but think that this was more than just a shopping trip. It was a turning point, not just for him, but for the countless others who faced similar battles every day. Echoes of the past. The sleek black sedan glided smoothly through the quiet streets as Morgan Freeman and Tom Reynolds sat in companionable silence. The weight of the day's events hung in the air, but there was also a newfound sense of camaraderie between the two men. Tom gazed out of the window, the familiar sights of his neighborhood passing by in a blur. For the first time in years, he felt more than just a shadow of his former self. He felt like someone truly seen, valued, and respected. Morgan broke the silence, his rich voice filled with curiosity. "Tell me, Tom, what brought you to serve this country? What made you don the uniform?" Tom turned to Morgan, his expression softening as memories of his youth flooded his mind. "It was 1967, he began, his voice steady but tinged with nostalgia. The world felt like it was on fire. Civil rights protests, the Vietnam War, and the constant fight for respect as a black man in America. My father used to say, if you want to change the system, you've got to stand inside it. That stuck with me." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Joining the army was my way of proving I belonged. I wanted to show that I was just as capable, just as worthy as anyone else. But the reality wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. Even in the military, prejudice followed me. I had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition." Morgan nodded, his face a mixture of understanding and admiration. "And yet you stayed. You didn't let the prejudice break you." Tom smiled faintly. "No, I didn't. I stayed because I believed in something bigger. I believed in my comrades, in the bond we shared on the battlefield. When bullets are flying and lives are on the line, the color of your skin doesn't matter. It's about trust, about knowing the person next to you has your back." He leaned back against the plush seat, his gaze distant. "Those years taught me more about courage, sacrifice, and resilience than I ever thought possible. But they also taught me that the fight doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. Coming home was another battle entirely." Morgan's expression darkened slightly. "The war might have ended overseas, but for veterans like you, the war at home never stopped." Tom nodded, his voice quiet. "Exactly. I came home to protests and hostility, even from people who shared my skin color. Why fight for a country that doesn't fight for you?" they'd ask. And honestly, I didn't have an answer for them. I just knew I couldn't give up on the idea of America, even when it seemed to have given up on me. Morgan's gaze was steady as he regarded Tom. "That takes a kind of strength most people can't even imagine." Tom chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Strength? I don't know about that. I just did what I thought was right. But some days, it's hard not to feel forgotten." The car slowed as they approached Tom's modest home, a single-story house that bore the marks of years of wear but radiated warmth nonetheless. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters had long since faded, but it was clear that this was a place built on love and perseverance. As the car came to a stop, the driver stepped out to open the door for Tom. Morgan followed, helping carry the bags of groceries. Together, they walked up the cracked concrete path leading to the front door. Tom fumbled with his keys, glancing apologetically at Morgan. "Sorry about the mess," he said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "I've been meaning to get around to fixing things up, but with Ella's condition." Morgan placed a reassuring hand on Tom's shoulder. "Don't apologize. A home isn't about the paint or the lawn. It's about the life lived within its walls." Tom unlocked the door and stepped inside, holding it open for Morgan. The interior of the house was neat but sparse, with worn furniture and faded photographs adorning the walls. The living room was dominated by medical equipment, a hospital bed, oxygen tanks, and a small table cluttered with prescription bottles. It was a space that spoke of both love and struggle. "Ella," Tom called out, his voice warm and gentle. "I'm home, sweetheart, and I brought a guest." A soft voice replied from the bedroom, tinged with surprise. "A guest? Who on earth?" Before she could finish, Morgan stepped into view, his presence filling the modest space. Ella's eyes widened in disbelief as she struggled to sit up in her bed. Her frail frame was a testament to the toll her illness had taken, but her spirit shone through in the warmth of her gaze. "Morgan Freeman," she whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "In my house." Morgan chuckled softly, stepping forward to take her hand in his. "In the flesh, ma'am. It's an honor to meet you." Ella's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at her husband. "Tom, what's going on? How did this happen?" Tom set the bags of groceries on the table and sat beside her, his voice filled with quiet pride. "It's a long story, Ella. Let's just say that today, someone reminded me that our sacrifices haven't gone unnoticed." Morgan pulled up a chair and sat across from the couple, his gaze warm and sincere. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, your story is one of resilience, love, and service. It's a story that deserves to be told, not just for you, but for every veteran who has ever felt forgotten." Ella reached for Tom's hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her frailty. "We've been through so much, Tom, but you've never stopped fighting for me, for us. And now, it seems, someone is fighting for you." Tom looked at her, his eyes softening. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Morgan smiled, his voice steady. "And neither would I. But this isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning." As the three of them sat together in the quiet intimacy of the Reynolds home, the weight of the day's events began to give way to a sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, Tom and Ella felt that they weren't alone in their struggles. And for Morgan, the encounter reaffirmed his belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outwards, creating waves of change. Little did they know, the story of that day would soon spread far beyond the walls of their home, inspiring others to stand up for what was right and to honor the sacrifices of those who had given so much. The ripple effect. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, casting a golden glow over Tom Reynolds' modest neighborhood. Inside his home, the atmosphere was far from ordinary. The events of the previous day still lingered in the air, creating an unusual buzz of anticipation and hope. Tom had woken early, his body accustomed to years of disciplined routines. But this morning, his mind was preoccupied with thoughts of Morgan Freeman's unexpected intervention and the subtle yet profound shift it had created in his life. Tom sat at the small kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee as he leafed through a newspaper. His eyes scanned the pages, pausing abruptly when he saw a photograph of Morgan Freeman standing in the parking lot of Pinnacle Mart, surrounded by reporters. The headline read, "Hollywood Legend Stands Up for Forgotten Heroes." Tom's hands trembled slightly as he read the article. It described the confrontation at the store, Morgan Freeman's impassioned defense of veterans, and the immediate fallout for the store's management. The reporter praised Freeman's actions, highlighting the need for society to recognize and honor the sacrifices of veterans like Tom. The article ended with a quote from Freeman. "When we forget the people who fought for our freedoms, we lose a piece of ourselves. This isn't just about one man. It's about all of us standing up for what's right." Tom folded the newspaper, setting it down with a mix of pride and apprehension. The attention was unexpected, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Part of him wanted to retreat into the quiet life he'd built with Ella, but another part recognized that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about something larger, a chance to spark change. Ella's voice called from the bedroom, breaking his thoughts. "Tom, are you awake?" He stood, moving quickly to her side. "I'm here, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Ella smiled weakly, her pale face framed by the morning light streaming through the window. "As well as I can, but I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. Morgan Freeman, Tom. Morgan Freeman was in our home." Tom chuckled softly, sitting beside her. "I know. It still feels surreal." Ella reached for his hand, her fingers cool but steady. "Tom, what he said about standing up for others, it means something. I think this could be the start of something bigger." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking the same thing, but I don't know where to start." Before Ella could respond, a knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Tom frowned, rising to his feet. Visitors were rare, especially so early in the day. He made his way to the door, his steps deliberate. When he opened it, he was greeted by a small crowd of reporters and camera crews. Their presence was both overwhelming and confusing. Microphones were thrust toward him as questions came rapid fire. "Mr. Reynolds, how do you feel about Morgan Freeman's public support? Do you think the incident at Pinnacle Mart reflects a larger societal problem?" What message do you have for other veterans facing similar challenges? Tom held up his hands, his voice firm but polite. Please, everyone, calm down. I wasn't expecting this, so I'll need a moment to think. The reporters quieted slightly, giving him space to gather his thoughts. Just as Tom began to speak, another voice cut through the crowd. Let the man breathe. The reporters parted, and to Tom's astonishment, Morgan Freeman himself stepped forward, dressed casually but with his usual air of dignity. He offered Tom a reassuring nod before addressing the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Reynolds didn't ask for this attention. He's a private man who has spent his life serving his country and caring for his family. Let's respect that. The reporters seemed to hesitate, their questions tapering off into murmurs. Morgan turned to Tom, his voice quieter. Do you mind if I come in, Tom? Tom stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Of course. I wasn't expecting you, Mr. Freeman. Morgan smiled as he stepped into the modest home, his presence filling the space. Call me Morgan. And I wasn't planning to drop by unannounced, but I wanted to make sure you were handling all this attention. It can be overwhelming. Tom led Morgan into the living room, where Ella was waiting. Her face lit up at the sight of their unexpected guest. Morgan, she said warmly, this is becoming a habit. Morgan chuckled, sitting in the chair beside her bed. Well, I thought it was only fair to check in on you both. Yesterday was a big day. Ella nodded, her expression serious. It was. And I've been telling Tom that this could be the start of something important. People need to hear these stories. Morgan's gaze softened. You're absolutely right, Ella. And that's why I'm here. The story of what happened at the store has gone viral. People are talking about it, about the way veterans are treated, about the sacrifices they make. It's striking a chord. Tom looked at Morgan, his voice uncertain. What does that mean for us? Morgan leaned forward, his tone earnest. It means you have a platform now, Tom. A chance to be a voice for veterans who've been ignored for too long. I know that might feel like a lot of responsibility, but I think you're the right man for it. Tom hesitated, the weight of the suggestion settling on his shoulders. I'm just a regular guy, Morgan. What could I possibly do? Morgan smiled, his voice steady. Sometimes, it's the regular guys who make the biggest impact. You've lived this. You understand it in a way no one else can. People will listen to you because your story is real. Ella reached for Tom's hand, her grip firm despite her frailty. He's right, Tom. You've always fought for others. Maybe it's time to fight for yourself, and for every veteran who feels forgotten. Tom looked between them, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and apprehension. If I do this, it's not about me. It's about all the men and women who served and never got the respect they deserve. Morgan nodded, his expression resolute. Then let's do it together. You tell your story, and I'll make sure the world hears it. The three of them sat together, their conversation turning to plans and possibilities. As the morning light filled the room, Tom began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a ripple effect that could change lives. By the time Morgan left, the plan was set in motion. Tom would share his story with the media, not as a victim, but as a voice for change. And with Morgan's support, his words would reach farther than he ever imagined. As Tom stood on the front porch, watching Morgan's car disappear down the street, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about what had happened at the store. It was about something much bigger. It was about standing up, not just for himself, but for every veteran who had ever been overlooked. And for the first time in years, Tom felt ready to fight again, not with weapons, but with words and the quiet strength that had carried him through a lifetime of battles. A voice for the forgotten. Tom Reynolds sat on the edge of his bed, his hands clasped tightly together as he stared at the modest space of his bedroom. The walls bore the memories of decades, photos of his and Ella's wedding, snapshots of their children growing up, and a few faded certificates of appreciation from his military service. Today, however, none of those memories brought him comfort. Instead, he wrestled with the weight of the decision he had made. He was no longer just Tom Reynolds, a retired soldier and caregiver to his ailing wife. Now he was a man who had agreed to step into the spotlight, not for fame or recognition, but for justice. The media buzz following Morgan Freeman's public defense of him had spiraled into something larger. Journalists, advocacy groups, and even local politicians had reached out, all eager to amplify his story. Ella's voice broke through his thoughts. "Tom, are you ready?" she asked gently from the other side of the room. She sat in her wheelchair, her frail figure wrapped in a soft shawl, her eyes filled with quiet strength. Tom nodded, standing up and adjusting his tie. It was the first time he had worn one in years, and the sensation was foreign, almost constricting. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Today, he would be speaking at a community forum organized by a coalition of veterans groups. The event, initially planned as a small gathering, had grown into a major occasion, thanks to the widespread attention their story had garnered. Morgan Freeman had personally invited him to share the stage, offering his unwavering support. "You'll do great, Tom," Ella said, her voice filled with encouragement. "You've always been a man of integrity. Just speak from the heart." Tom bent down and kissed her forehead, his voice soft. "I'll do my best, sweetheart. For you, and for everyone like us." The forum was held at the local Veterans Hall, a modest building that had seen better days. The weathered bricks and faded flag outside belied the energy and anticipation buzzing within. As Tom and Ella arrived, they were greeted by a crowd far larger than they had expected. Veterans in uniform, families with young children, and supporters from all walks of life filled the space, their conversations a low hum of excitement. Morgan Freeman was already there, standing near the podium, and engaging in conversation with a group of reporters. When he saw Tom and Ella enter, his face lit up with a warm smile. He made his way over, shaking Tom's hand firmly. "You made it," Morgan said, his voice rich with approval. "How are you feeling?" Tom chuckled nervously, like I'm about to march into enemy territory without a map. Morgan laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "You'll do just fine. Just remember, you're not alone up there." As they made their way to the stage, the crowd quieted, their attention focused on the two men who had become symbols of a larger movement. Morgan spoke first, his commanding presence filling the room. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate. "We're here today to talk about something that should never be forgotten. The sacrifices made by our veterans and the respect they deserve. Too often, their struggles are met with indifference. Too often, they're left to navigate a system that fails them at every turn." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. "But today, we have a chance to change that. Today, we have a man who represents the best of what it means to serve. A man whose story is not just his own, but the story of thousands who've been overlooked and undervalued. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Reynolds." The room erupted into applause as Tom stepped up to the podium. He glanced at Ella, who gave him a small nod of encouragement, and then at Morgan, who stood beside him like a steadfast ally. Taking a deep breath, Tom began to speak. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman, and thank you all for being here today," he said, his voice steady but raw with emotion. "I'm not a politician or a public speaker. I'm just a man who served his country and came home to a world that didn't feel quite the same." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "For years, I've been quietly fighting battles that most people never see. Battles against prejudice, against financial hardship, and against a system that sometimes feels like it's forgotten the very people it claims to honor. But yesterday, something changed. Yesterday, I was reminded that there are people who care, people who are willing to stand up for what's right." The crowd listened intently as Tom recounted the events at Pinnacle Mart, his voice filled with both pain and pride. He spoke about Ella, about the challenges of caregiving, and about the countless veterans he had known who had faced similar struggles. "We're not asking for handouts," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "We're asking for respect, for recognition of the sacrifices we've made, for the chance to live with dignity." The audience erupted into applause, their support palpable. Tom felt a surge of emotion, his heart swelling with gratitude and determination. He glanced at Ella, whose eyes glistened with pride. Morgan stepped forward, placing a hand on Tom's shoulder. "That, my friends, is the voice of a man who understands what it means to serve, not just in the military, but in life. And it's a voice we all need to hear." As the event concluded, Tom was approached by countless attendees, veterans, families, and supporters, each eager to share their own stories or offer their thanks. The experience was overwhelming but deeply affirming. Later that evening, as Tom and Ella sat together in their living room, he reflected on the day. "I never thought I'd be the one standing on a stage, talking to all those people," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. Ella smiled, resting her hand on his. "You've always been a leader, Tom. Now the world knows it too." For the first time in years, Tom felt a sense of purpose beyond his own struggles. He wasn't just fighting for himself and Ella anymore. He was fighting for every veteran who had ever felt forgotten, for every caregiver who had ever felt overwhelmed, and for a society that desperately needed to remember its heroes. And he wasn't alone. Morgan Freeman's unwavering support, coupled with the growing momentum of the movement, had created a spark. Now it was up to Tom to keep the fire burning. A legacy of change. The days following the community forum were a whirlwind of activity for Tom Reynolds. His story had struck a chord far beyond the modest confines of his neighborhood. News outlets picked up the tale, framing it as an inspiring narrative of resilience and justice. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #RespectOurVeterans and #TomReynoldsStory, as thousands shared their own experiences or expressed outrage at the treatment of veterans. For Tom, the newfound attention was both empowering and overwhelming. Requests for interviews poured in, advocacy groups reached out with offers of support, and strangers sent letters thanking him for standing up. Ella, ever his anchor, encouraged him to embrace the moment. "You've started something important, Tom," she said one evening as they sat in the living room. "Don't let this momentum go to waste." But it wasn't just about speaking out anymore. Tom wanted to make a tangible difference. A call to action. 2 weeks after the forum, Tom received a call from Morgan Freeman. The actor's deep, reassuring voice came through the line. "Tom, how are you holding up?" Tom chuckled softly. "Still getting used to all the attention, Morgan, but I'm managing." "That's good to hear," Morgan replied. "Listen, I've been thinking, what if we take this a step further? A movement like this needs structure, direction. What if we create something lasting?" Tom frowned slightly, intrigued but cautious. "What do you mean?" Morgan's tone grew earnest. "A foundation, Tom. Something dedicated to supporting veterans and their families, providing resources, advocacy, and maybe even scholarships for caregivers. We can call it the Reynolds Freeman Foundation." The suggestion left Tom momentarily speechless. A foundation. It felt larger than anything he had ever imagined. But as he considered it, the idea began to resonate deeply. That could really make a difference," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But I wouldn't even know where to start." Morgan's warm laughter filled the line. "That's why I'm here, my friend. I'll help you every step of the way." Building a movement. Over the next several months, Tom and Morgan worked tirelessly to establish the Reynolds Freeman Foundation. They partnered with veterans organizations, caregivers coalitions, and medical advocacy groups to identify the most pressing needs. Tom's modest home became a makeshift office, with Ella managing correspondence and Morgan dropping by regularly to strategize. Their mission was clear: to provide immediate aid to struggling veterans and their families, while advocating for systemic change to ensure better long-term support. One of their first initiatives was a grant program to cover medical expenses for veterans and their caregivers. Tom insisted on naming it after Ella. "She's been my rock," he said during a planning meeting. This foundation wouldn't exist without her. Ella protested modestly, but Morgan wholeheartedly agreed. Behind every great man is someone who keeps him grounded. It's only right. The first victory. The foundation's first major milestone came when Morgan arranged a meeting with lawmakers in Washington, D.C. Together, Tom and Morgan presented a proposal for a bill that would expand access to veteran discounts, improve funding for medical supplies, and mandate training for businesses to better serve veterans. The meeting was nerve-wracking for Tom. He had never imagined himself speaking in front of politicians, but as he shared his story, the room grew silent. His words carry a raw authenticity that no amount of rhetoric could replicate. "I'm not asking for pity," he concluded. "I'm asking for respect. For myself, for my brothers and sisters in arms, and for the families who stand by us." The proposal gained bipartisan support, and within months, the bill, dubbed the Veterans Dignity Act, was signed into law. It was a monumental victory, and the foundation's success only fueled their resolve, a growing legacy. As the foundation grew, so did its impact. They launched programs to train businesses on how to create veteran-friendly policies. They funded mobile clinics to bring medical care directly to underserved communities, and they established an annual award to honor individuals and organizations that went above and beyond to support veterans. Through it all, Tom remained humble. He continued to care for Ella, balancing his newfound responsibilities with his devotion to her. Despite the accolades and attention, he never lost sight of the reason he had stepped into the spotlight: to make life better for those like him. A quiet revolution. 1 year after the incident at Pinnacle Mart, Tom found himself standing on a stage once again. This time, it was at a gala celebrating the foundation's first anniversary. The room was filled with supporters, veterans, and families whose lives had been touched by their work. Morgan Freeman introduced him with his signature gravitas. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate a man who turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. A man who embodies the very principles of service and sacrifice. Please welcome Tom Reynolds." The applause was thunderous as Tom stepped to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. "This isn't about me," he began, his voice steady. "This is about all of us, about the power we have to stand up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. Together, we've created something bigger than any one person. And together, we'll keep fighting for every veteran, every caregiver, and every family who deserves better." As the crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation, Tom glanced toward the back of the room, where Ella sat in her wheelchair, her face glowing with pride. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Tom knew that every struggle, every sacrifice, had been worth it. The enduring impact. In the years that followed, the Reynolds Freeman Foundation became a beacon of hope for veterans and their families. Tom's story continued to inspire, proving that one voice could spark a revolution. And though he often deflected credit, those who knew him understood that his quiet strength and unwavering integrity were the heart of the movement. As Tom and Ella sat together on their front porch one evening, watching the sun set over their neighborhood, Ella leaned her head against his shoulder. "You've built something incredible, Tom," she said softly. "Something that will last long after we're gone." Tom smiled, his hand resting over hers. "I couldn't have done it without you, or without people like Morgan. It just goes to show, you never know how far one act of kindness can go." As the stars began to dot the night sky, they sat in comfortable silence, the legacy of their journey shining brighter than ever. For Tom, it was never about recognition or glory. It was about doing what was right, and in that, he had found a purpose that would echo through generations. The end of the beginning. The applause in the grand ballroom of the gala was still echoing in Tom Reynolds' ears as he stepped off the stage. The faces in the audience, veterans in uniform, families, caregivers, and advocates, beamed with admiration and gratitude. Tom felt a quiet humility settle over him, a stark contrast to the man who had once hesitated to share his story. His heart swelled with pride, not for himself, but for the collective strength of the movement he had helped inspire. Morgan Freeman was the first to greet him as he descended the steps, his hand extended in a firm shake. "Tom, that was powerful. You spoke not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever felt forgotten." Tom smiled, his grip strong. "It wasn't just me, Morgan. It was you, Ella, and everyone who believed in this cause. I'm just grateful I could be part of it." Morgan nodded, his voice filled with warmth. "You're more than part of it, Tom. You're its heart." Returning home, the gala concluded with a sense of triumph, but for Tom, the evening wasn't about celebrations. It was about returning home to Ella, the woman who had stood by him through every hardship and every victory. As they drove back through the quiet streets, Ella reached for Tom's hand, her touch light but steady. "You were amazing tonight," she said softly. "I've never been prouder of you." Tom glanced at her, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Ella. Every word I spoke tonight came from the life we've built together." When they arrived home, the house felt like a sanctuary. Tom helped Ella settle into bed, her frailty more evident than usual after the long day. He pulled up a chair beside her, their hands intertwined as they sat in comfortable silence. "Do you think it will last?" Ella asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom frowned. "What do you mean?" "The foundation, the movement. Do you think people will keep fighting for change?" Tom leaned closer, his expression resolute. "Yes, I do. Because this isn't just about me or you. It's about a community of people who've been waiting for someone to say enough. We've given them a reason to hope, and hope doesn't fade easily." Ella smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're right. You always are. A lasting legacy." Over the next few years, the Reynolds Freeman Foundation grew into a nationwide force for change. Its initiatives expanded to include housing assistance for homeless veterans, mental health services, and even job training programs. Tom became a reluctant figurehead, his story featured in documentaries, books, and countless interviews. But through it all, he remained grounded, his focus always on the people he served. He continued to care for Ella, who became an outspoken advocate for caregivers, often appearing alongside Tom at events. Their bond became a symbol of resilience and love, inspiring others to find strength in their own struggles. One evening, several years later, Tom sat on the front porch, the cool night air brushing against his face. The stars above were brilliant, reminding him of the countless nights he had spent under similar skies during his service. Ella's voice called softly from inside the house. "Tom, are you coming in?" "In a minute," he replied, his voice warm. He looked out at the quiet street, his mind replaying the journey that had brought him here. From a humiliating encounter at a store to a movement that had changed lives. He thought of Morgan Freeman, whose unwavering support had been the catalyst for everything. And he thought of Ella, the love of his life, who had been his constant companion through it all. As he sat there, a feeling of peace washed over him. He knew that his work would continue, carried on by the foundation and the countless lives it had touched. His story was no longer just his own. It was a legacy, a testament to the power of resilience, dignity, and the enduring fight for justice. When he finally stood and made his way inside, he found Ella waiting for him, her eyes filled with the same warmth that had captivated him decades ago. He kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "We did it, Ella." She smiled, her voice soft but unwavering. "No, Tom, you did it, and the world is better for it." And as they sat together, the quiet of the night surrounding them, Tom felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had lived a life of service, of love, and of purpose, and in the end, that was all that truly mattered.